Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, Portal Protection, Raising Security Without Raising Disruptions. I'm Damon Teepee, Director of Product Marketing, and I'll be joined today by Jeff Hickman, one of our senior and well-seasoned solution engineers. Before we review an agenda, let's take care of some housekeeping items. All attendee audio lines are muted, and this is for everyone's listening pleasure. You can submit questions via the Q&A panel at any time throughout the session. It's located on the bottom right-hand side of your console. Those submitted questions will be answered during the Q&A at the end of the presentation. And if we run out of time, we'll follow up with you directly. These slides and a recording of this session will be sent to you later this week. So there's no need to submit a question asking for them. And if you have any questions related to this webinar or any others, you can always contact us at webinars@secureauth.com. So let's get on to the agenda. We're expecting this webinar to run about 35 minutes. I will talk about an age-old problem with authentication where the perception is if you want more protection, you sacrifice user convenience and vice versa. I'll also talk about challenges delivering both strong security and a disruptionless user experience, particularly when talking about consumer portals. I'll go through the costs of not addressing both and talk about how SecureAuth can help in both of those areas. Jeff will then take over and demonstrate a day in the life of an average user, giving us all a feel for disruptions, timing between action and response, give a glimpse behind the scenes as to what's going on, and then, lastly, we'll end with that question and answer session. So let's go ahead and dive in. I'm sure it comes as no surprise. In a recent survey, the top two concerns from a security perspective were providing the best possible user experience and preventing the misuse of stolen credentials. And that's largely explained because most portals have two sides. One being the security side, who want greater security beyond passwords, concerned that a breach could equal job loss, and know that breaches and the aftermath are now boardroom-level conversations and concerns. The other side being sales and marketing, where brand is king, work life revolves around getting and retaining customers, and a positive user experience kind of trumps all, even if it means less protection. So many organizations have begun two-factor authentication projects to improve security, but it may not be enough to stop determined attackers. And I'll kind of review that a little bit later. And oftentimes, two-factor authentication can cause a poor user experience with multiple daily disruptions for accessing multiple resources, depending on the frequency of login. So let's now take a look at some of those challenges related to strong security. So breaches rose 40% in 2016, have been increasing over the past 3 to 5 years. Customer portals at Verizon, ADP, Cisco, and Quest Diagnostics were among 2016 victims. 81% of 2016 breaches leveraged stolen and or weak passwords. This percentage has also grown over the past couple of years, with less than 50% 3 years ago and now up to 81%. And that's really no surprise that attackers are increasingly walking in the front door with those stolen credentials when some of the top passwords in 2016 were 123456, QWERTY, 111111, and or password. So they're easily guessed, and with 4 out of 5 surveyed adults admitting to using the same password for more than one account, a breach at a Gmail or a Yahoo or any other large organization can make hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of stolen credentials available on the dark web and can indirectly affect your security. Think recently about the Equifax breach from just a couple weeks ago. Mandiant FireEye M-Trend reports of 2017 inform us that attackers go undetected for roughly 99 days. And while this number has also been decreasing over the past couple of years, it was 229 days in 2013, and now 99 in 2016, Over 3 months is still too long and is plenty of time for an attacker to get what they want and be long gone before detection. And lastly, two-factor authentication is a great first step beyond passwords, but may not provide enough protection. Phone-based authentications are being more frequently bypassed by attackers, whether taking over a phone account by spoofing the carrier, intercepting a signal, porting a legitimate number to a burner or a voice over IP phone. Knowledge-based questions don't provide adequate coverage because answers can be easily obtained from social media or social engineering. Hard tokens have been compromised in the past, but traditionally offer a poor user experience and are costly with high administrative burden. And then more popular methods or becoming more popular methods, things like push to accept, where users just hit accept or deny on their phone. While convenient and easy to use, users become conditioned to hit accept even when not authenticated. So at DEF CON, an attacker stated that 7 out of 7 times a legitimate user hit accept and allowed that attacker access when a legitimate user wasn't even authenticating. So with so much at stake, you know, your portal needs protection beyond just two-factor authentication alone for good security. But as always, there are user experience challenges to deal with. So while your customers have become more accustomed to lengthy authentication processes as more and more organizations are implementing stronger controls, minimizing steps can be a relief and help keep customers happier. So not requiring users to endure lengthy enrollment processes by using social logins and allowing users to scan codes to enroll is good. So making things as self-serve as possible really should be the goal. Constantly requiring password changes or complicated strings of numbers, letters, symbols may make it hard for attackers to guess, but with millions of stolen credentials for sale, it may not matter, and serves to increase help desk costs as users more readily forget them and have to make that help desk call. So moving between and among applications should not require unnecessary authentication disruptions. Seamless transition and movement among multiple applications, again, is the goal. And then lastly, it's frustrating to sit on the phone waiting for the help desk. I'm sure we've all been there. You know, empowering your users to help themselves will expedite a solution to their problem and keep your help desk calls and costs to a minimum. So interestingly, in a recent survey conducted by SecureAuth, 86% revealed that they would use two-factor authentication if provided. So as users become more security conscious, they may actually welcome added security. Let's now take a brief look at the cost of not addressing both strong security and a disruptionless user experience. So the average cost of a breach is roughly $4 million per. That's according to the Ponemon Institute. But this pertains more to business-to-employee scenarios. With consumer portals typically having much larger user counts, costs could approach what we've seen at larger breaches from a couple years ago. So Anthem has paid out $115 million to date. Home Depot is nearing $180 million, and Target is now closing in on paying out $300 million. Those kinds of payouts can jeopardize the survival of many businesses or organizations. A stolen record costs between $80 and $355, depending on what industry and the black market demand for them. But brand erosion is another real concern. You know, how willing are customers to re-engage with you after an announced breach? How loyal to your brand will they remain? In the days following the company's disclosure of their breach, Target's brand plunged 35 points on a 100-point brand index scale. But it's hard to, it's hard to quantify. But how much revenue is lost if customers seek alternatives because your portal is difficult to use? Bain & Company found that engaged and happy customers spend between 20 and 40% more than other customers. Another cost that can adversely affect the benefit of again, a smooth running portal is those help desk costs. The more users you engage with, the greater number of potential help desk calls, be it for password resets or account unlocking, multi-factor authentication, program enrollment, etc. But let's shift gears a little bit and talk about solving these problems and challenges now. So SecureAuth adaptive access control solutions can prevent the misuse of compromised credentials, reduce the risk of consumer portal fraud or data breach, and give you the strong security you need to stay ahead of threats and deliver the minimal disruption experience your users want. So what makes it truly secure? We have over 25 different supported multi-factor authentication methods, meaning you can offer your customers, partners, or employees options. Have users that don't want to use their personal smartphones? We offer over 20 other ways to introduce a second or third factor for authentication. But as I mentioned earlier, determined attackers can get past some multi-factor authentication methods. So we offer multiple pre-authentication risk checks and offer more of them than any other vendor. We'll talk more about what those are on the next slide, but the combination of multi-factor authentication and multiple pre-authentication risk checks means you have a safety net or insurance policy against attackers. Those same risk checks give you the confidence to not even require a multi-factor authentication step at all if no risk is present. You can even go passwordless, alleviating the burden of remembering, replacing, or updating those pesky passwords. And think your customers, partners, and employees won't like that? To further ease use, we offer single sign-on to traverse among applications without disruption and offer self-service capabilities for password resets, account unlocking, updating personal information, and again, even device enrollment, which are all convenient for users and have the potential to offset some significant help desk costs for you. And lastly, we further provide value by accelerating threat detection with high-fidelity threat information from those risk checks I talked about earlier. Unlike other vendors that might not be able to tell you why an authentication failed, we can, and you can use it to correlate with other security events and alerts hitting your SIM or your security operations center, helping sift through and focus on threats that matter. So I talked earlier about this multi-layered risk analysis. It's also known as adaptive authentication and how it improves security and improves user experience. The risk analysis adapts to changing conditions and can be applied during one-time registration, daily authentications, and continual validation for things like self-service password resets and profile updates. So let's talk about what some of these risk checks do. Device recognition, we can look at web browser configuration, language, installed fonts, browser plugins, device IP address, screen resolutions, cookie settings, and basically we take all of this to create a unique device profile and associate it to a specific user. We provide a threat service where we can compare the IP address of an authentication request to known white and black lists, but can also compare to continually updated live threat intelligence service feeds. And this is where we identify if a request, for example, is coming from an anonymity network like Tor or been associated with nefarious activity in the past. Directory lookup, here is where we're checking group membership and user attributes. By comparing to others, we can find abnormalities. Oftentimes attackers create a new identity, but don't create that new identity with all the fields your organization requires in the places that you require them. Therefore, by checking it, we can find inconsistencies and require additional authentication steps before gaining access. Geolocation, we can compare an identity's current geographic location against good or bad locations. So for example, if you don't have employees or business partners or customers in, say, China, therefore there's no need for someone from China to be trying to access your resources. Geovelocity, this is where we look at whether an improbable travel event has occurred. So for example, a user logs in at 2 p.m. from Los Angeles and attempts to log back in an hour later from New York City. Impossible that that user was able to travel from California to New York in an hour. Geofencing, this is where we can create a virtual geographic barrier where access requests within or outside that barrier are just treated differently. Unique to SecureAuth is phone number fraud prevention. A phone number profiling service provides the ability to take a phone number and return real-time intelligence on various aspects of the number to determine risk and fraudulent activity. So allowing us to identify the class of phone, is it a voice over IP phone, a landline, mobile, toll-free, associated with a particular number, and then block certain classes of phones. We can also identify the carrier network. So for example, calls from phone networks in Iran or Afghanistan, for example, or others can be blocked. And we can also identify if a phone number has recently been ported and require additional authentication steps to verify that identity. Behavioral biometrics is another kind of unique risk check to SecureAuth, and this is where we analyze typing sequences and mouse movements to create a unique profile for each user on each device. So even if attacker has proper credentials, we can deny access or require a multi-factor authentication step because that attacker will not type or move like the real or legitimate user. The last two here on the slide come by way of our partner community. For identity governance, this really comes from SailPoint, where they provide us a risk score based on entitlements. The more access a user has to sensitive resources, the higher their score. And lastly, we have user and entity behavioral analytics. This comes to us through Exabeam, where they track and baseline user behavior and look for anomalies or things out of the ordinary. Exabeam tells us if behavior is inside or outside a particular norm. And we can utilize that information in our overall adaptive risk scoring. And SecureAuth has more pre-authentication risk checks than any other vendor. They happen without users even knowing and can improve both security and user experience. So I'm sure you can see how this improves security, but might be wondering, okay, how does this help with less disruptions to users? So if we see no major red flags or there are low risk factors during authentication, we can remove the multi-factor authentication step and allow users in with only a username and password. If there is medium level of risk, we can require a multi-factor authentication step. And if there is a high level of risk, we can deny that access request outright. So this is kind of the last slide before our demonstration of a day in the life of a user. One of our large consumer portal customers didn't really believe that many external threats were attempting access and allowed us to run 3 weeks of authentication data through our SecureAuth threat service. And that's just one of those many risk analysis layers we just talked about. The results were a bit eye-popping. So again, in 3 weeks, they had 7,130 suspicious logins, or 339 potential threats a day, or 14 attacks an hour. To dive a little deeper into those details, there were 7,103 suspicious logins from an anonymous proxy, 14 malicious logins from previously known cyber criminal activity, and then 13 suspicious logins coming from transparent proxies. So I'm sure you'd be surprised to see the volume of fraudulent login attempts on your portal. Contact SecureAuth to set up a trial and go from guessing to knowing. With that thought, I'm going to turn things over to Jeff Hickman for a brief demo.
Thank you, Damon.
Yep.
So here we have set up a SecureAuth consumer portal. It's a kind of implementation using the SecureAuth APIs to provide a look at how organizations are implementing all these pre-authentication risk checks, multi-factor authentication natively within their applications. This is all achievable using SecureAuth's RESTful APIs. It's very simple to integrate. In fact, you can navigate to our GitHub account at SecureAuth Corp, and you can find a number of SDKs already preloaded, ready for you to integrate with your application in some of the most popular languages available for web development. A typical user, when they're logging in, is presented with a number of choices. Either they can register and log in locally using a username and password, or they can sign in with a social identity. In either case, SecureAuth can be applied to evaluate the criteria of that authentication for both users, or the context and signals based upon that. So as a user, if I'm going to log in with, say, my email address, and I provide the system my password, I will be prompted for second factor authentication. The reason for this is that we're able to look at the device recognition of my device, which is telling me that, hey, it's not found. I've never seen this device before. And additionally, the adaptive authentication response says, based on this device recognition and the other layers of analysis that we're doing, off of a single endpoint, our suggested action is to two-factor my user at this point in time. So as a user, I can be presented with a variety of choices of second-factor options or multi-factor options like Damon spoke about, from text, sending one-time passcodes or maybe even a link to log users in, to push notifications to a mobile app or login request or symbol to accept login requests to mobile devices. So when a user selects a multi-factor method, they simply get the prompt to enter that code that they received. And once they've submitted that code, SecureAuth validates it against the API, and boom, the user is logged into a consumer portal. What happens the next time the user goes to authenticate? When they've already authenticated within a configurable time frame, leveraging the APIs, you can then say, hey, the next time this user goes to log in, maybe we don't need to second factor. Very simply and very quickly are pretty much the same as how Damon stated it as identifying these pre-risk analysis checks. When the user goes to log in their next time, they're instantly logged into their application because all those checks have been done, and we have found that that user, in this case, maybe has a device already registered, so this is my previous login attempt, or maybe already satisfies the other requirements that you've associated with your organization in the SecureAuth APIs. Conversely, if maybe a user comes in from a Tor browser, and that's not something that you want to allow the user to do, maybe the user comes in from a known hacktivist site or something along those lines, you can choose to redirect the user. If I can type my email address here, you can choose to redirect the user to a page that informs them that, hey, we've detected some suspicious activity. There's something wrong with your login attempt, and that we would put that user into a place where they could contact support, or this event could be logged to your SIM or SOC, or even you could just simply step up the two-factor authentication depending on the result of that risk score. The process is very simple to integrate. We have a number of large customers and the millions of users who are currently using this platform to authenticate users. The idea and design behind the SecureAuth APIs is to allow you the flexibility to pick and choose what different authentication mechanisms you're using at different points. For example, in registering an account, you may want to verify phone numbers and email addresses by sending a link or a one-time passcode to those different entered users' information, as well as validating the adaptive authentication stack and making sure that the user is actually coming from a legitimate source. This is a very common way for attackers to target things such as healthcare or insurance portals, where a user may already be registered with the organization but may not have a portal account. Think of your bank account. When you sign up for an account in the actual branch, you may not have a portal login at first. You may have to take your account number and go register that account number. Well, attackers look for these things. They look for these portals that they know that their users pre-registered with some information, and they go to abuse that by actually creating or registering an account at the origination source using that maybe breached or leaked information, so that the good user never even gets the opportunity to register. The bad actor has already compromised it. By putting this adaptive authentication and these pre-authentication or really contextual authentication information in front of things like registering an account, forgetting their username or password, even moving between protected areas of an application, such as moving into a wire transfer or moving into updating life insurance beneficiary information. By placing all this in front of that, you get continuous authentication of looking at the continual contextual clues about how that user is authenticating. Whether the user logs in from LA, 5 minutes ago and now is trying to log in from somewhere in Eastern Europe, whether they decide to switch to using the Tor browser, all that is indications and information that you can use to pivot your application's workflow to derive a very seamless authentication experience for those end users. With that, I'll hand it back over to Damon. And as a note, this application will be available on our GitHub account here shortly within the months that follow. So you're able to take a look at it and view the content and see how it could apply to your own portal as well.
Okay, sorry. Thank you all for attending our webinar. Hopefully you found the information new and informative. Before we open up for questions, if you want more information on how SecureAuth can protect your portal with minimal user disruptions, check out www.secureauth.com portal-protection. So with that, again, I encourage you, if you have any questions, go to that bottom right-hand screen, and we've got one here. Can you give an example of the 5 most common pre-authentication checks? And
yeah,
Jeff, do you want to maybe take that one from your experience?
Yeah, from my experience, there's some really common checks that kind of seem when we talk about this in the industry like, okay, well, yeah, why aren't you doing that? But surprisingly, they're not done very commonly until people implement SecureAuth. And where we see this, one of the kind of limelight examples of this was O2 Bank in Germany, who had 2-factor authentication via SMS. In that specific attack, the 2-factor authentication was bypassed by what's called the SS7 hack against the cell phone network, where they actually were able to take a device, tap into the cell phone network, and get text messages. So what they did is they had a list of stolen accounts. They got the 2-factor prompt, but because they were listening to the cell data coming out to where those users were, they would simply take that 2-factor authentication one-time passcode and put it into the field, and boom, they're logged in. If that bank had been doing simple checks like looking for the threats of the IP address, which most of those were coming from transparent proxies, anonymous proxies, things like the Onion Router and Tor, as well as things like a geolocation. A simple geolocation check would have verified that it's not the same user. In fact, device recognition would have verified that it's a brand new user as well and added additional security to it. So the most common checks that I see customers implement are the IP evaluation through the threat service, the geolocation detection, the geovelocity detection, determining when users are logging in, and then also the device recognition and group and membership attributes, being able to determine those to pivot to different workflows for end users.
Cool. Thanks, Jeff. We've got another question. Besides Exabeam, are all of the authentication modules original to SecureAuth? For example, with the geolocation or geo-vicinity, do you OEM from another company, like Pitney Bowes Software, for example? And then thank you for this excellent presentation today.
Yeah, that's a great question. So aside from Exabeam and SailPoint, who are 2 of our Connected Security Alliance partners providing us additional capability for those risk checks, all of them originate from SecureAuth services. We do use other partners to add additional information or high-fidelity information into those feeds. For example, geolocation information, one of the partners I can disclose is providing us with high-fidelity geolocation information, as well as our threat intelligence is coming from not just the published Tor exit nodes and things along those lines, but one of the high-profile threat services out there as well to fidelity that information. But those, aside from the user and entity behavior analytics and the identity governance risk layers, everything else is native to the SecureAuth platform. It's all through our services and all aggregated and kind of curated by SecureAuth.
Cool. Thank you. We've got another question. We have huge seasonal spikes in people coming to our portal. What kind of thresholds or limitations does your software have? What are the biggest portals SecureAuth supports today?
Excellent question. We have portals ranging up from 10 to 8 million users who are logging in through SecureAuth. It's a very scalable solution. It provides fast and easy deployment so that standing up, if needed for seasonal increases, standing up additional capability is very simple to do. The framework is designed to expand both vertically with depth of the actual system as well as horizontally, whether that be geographic load balancing or just horizontal scale needed for coverage. So we can definitely handle a large volume of users without a problem.
So there's another question just came in. Do you use known compromised credentials as an authentication pre-check or as part of your authentication?
That's a great question. And Damon, I'm not sure how much we can talk about that today, but that is something that we are heavily investigating to be able to identify known stolen credentials, whether those are out on the dark web or even just known compromised passwords. You may have seen, like, Have I Been Pwned, which has published a list of known passwords that have been out there in the wild. That's definitely something that we are heavily targeting, but we want to make sure that we don't leave any gaps for things like, you know, false flags or bad kind of user experience in that. So we want to make sure the data is heavily curated and very high fidelity when we roll that feature out.
Okay, maybe one last question here. Can you customize the branding, the look and feel of the SecureAuth authentication screen prior to portal access?
Absolutely. So there's two ways that SecureAuth is primarily implemented for consumer portals. Probably the most common that I see is using the RESTful APIs that SecureAuth provides. This allows you to keep your look and feel of your portal as it exists today, just by inserting some programmatic calls to SecureAuth and then determining what you're moving from there. So all your brand and everything stays the same just by leveraging the additional SecureAuth workflows. That allows probably the most customizable experience because you're literally just injecting it into your existing portal. However, SecureAuth also offers the ability to have hosted interface on the SecureAuth appliance. You can leverage these hosted interfaces if you don't have a portal today or if you wanted to front-end your portal with them using some sort of SSO technology to eventually move the user into your existing application. That allows still a great amount of flexibility when it comes to theming. Our branding capabilities are actually completely open to you, so you can edit the brand entirely. In fact, we don't even require you to have SecureAuth anywhere on the page. In fact, we would encourage you not to have SecureAuth on the page. So we allow you to fully brand, customize, and curate the look and feel that would work best for your customers, using any of the delivery mechanisms for the SecureAuth authentication that you choose.
Perfect. Thanks, Jeff. I want to thank everyone for attending. I want to remind everyone that we will be sending out within a week or so these presentation slides as well as a link to a recording of this presentation. So if you want to revisit it, you want to share it with others, you have that capability. And then lastly, hope you have a great day, and thanks once again for attending.